Hello again, and welcome to week 4. At this point, you have already read the piece Rhetorical Reading Strategies and the Construction of Meaning by Christina Haas and Linda Flower. So let's go ahead and move forward. These authors are both very well known within the field of rhetoric, and they have quite a bit to contribute when it comes to the discussion of rhetorical reading strategies and the construction of meaning. So with this piece, the authors have summarized and refined the constructive rhetorical view of reading by raising two questions. The first question is, how does this constructive process play itself out in the actual thinking process of reading? The second question is, are all readers actually aware of or in control of the discourse act which current theories describe? In their article, the authors identify rhetorical reading strategies that clearly show the difference between superficial reading and critical reading. In fact, both of these authors have designated an entire section to answering the question, what is good reading? And then they actually follow that one up by giving an explicit strategy for what good reading really is. So as you're pretty well aware, you've been in school now for quite some time. You've went through grade school, junior high or middle school, high school, and now you're here in college, and you are often asked to read. And even though you were taught to read initially, you may have been taught the mechanics of it, but not too many people have actually been taught what good reading really is. And so that's why these authors have decided to follow up on this. It's a concept that we often take for granted within education and otherwise, really. So when you're asked to read something, there's all kinds of ways you can read a document. You can skim, which means to read quickly and pick up every other word or so, and sometimes every other sentence, depending on your strategy for reading. There are people who speed read and swear by it, and there are their own strategies that are involved with that. And really, it depends on, and there's like a deeper reading where you read your material and you actually think about what you're taking in. And as I started to say before, these strategies, people tend to use these strategies depending on what kind of assignment they have, what the goal of an assignment is, or if it's an assignment at all. If you are reading an email from your grandmother, for instance, and I know most grandmothers don't email, but let's just say that your grandmother has emailed you. If you're reading an email from your grandmother, you're going to spend time reading it a lot more differently than you might if you get spam sent to your UC email account. Most of the time, we can spot spam just by looking at the user that has sent us the email and their address, and then just kind of generally looking at the message without even fully reading it. You can typically tell when something's spam. And you don't necessarily read it as deeply as you might that email from your grandmother. So that's what the authors talk about. And they describe what good reading is and give directions specifically to achieve that goal. Or within their directions, they provide strategies, I should say, to achieve that goal. The goal of this piece really is for the authors to help us understand what good reading is and what the expectation is when you're asked to read something, particularly in school. So when you're asked to read something critically, often it's not really something that's explained, right? And discussing these kinds of strategies will give you the kind of vocabulary that you need to explore your reading processes. The investigation the authors call the Think Aloud protocol is an exercise that can be done with students within a class, It can also be done outside of class as well. And it's actually very helpful in assessing your own reading abilities. It's different to actually hear what you think within that exercise as well. So some of the takeaways for this that I'd like you to keep in mind are, first off, keep in mind what a text means varies with the reader and their reading strategy and experiences. Number two, reading rhetorically means identifying a text's rhetorical situation. Now, we've talked about rhetorical situation a bit, especially last week, but in case you've forgotten, let's have a quick review of what rhetorical situation is. Very quick definition. Rhetorical situation, generally speaking, the rhetorical situation can be understood as the circumstances under which the rhetorician or rhetor writes or speaks. So it's the circumstances in which you are writing. That's the rhetorical situation. And here's a little quick bullet list of kind of examples of it. The nature and disposition of the audience can be considered the rhetorical situation. The writer's goal or purpose can be considered the rhetorical situation. And moving on, whatever else has been said on the subject and the general state of the world outside the issue at hand can be the rhetorical situation, because all of these elements work together to determine what kinds of arguments will be effective. So let's step back here. Finally, the last take-home point for this piece is expert readers don't only read for what a text says. They also read for how a text fits into what they already know. So if you think about it for a moment, let's look back or think back on the email from your grandmother. When you're reading an email from your grandmother, you're not just going to be reading for what she's saying directly in that moment. For example, your grandmother might tell you about how she received a new pair of gloves in the mail. Well, receiving a new pair of gloves in the mail, wow, that's exciting, right? So it may not seem like a big deal to you. However, if you know about a situation in which your grandmother, and there's a bit of a backstory to it, that your grandmother has ordered a pair of gloves, they sent her the wrong ones, it went back and forth, and you know that even though it's just a pair of gloves, that it's a big deal to your grandmother, and you can tell what that means to her. That's exactly what takeaway point 3 here is discussing. You don't just read for what a text says. You also think about how it fits into what you already know. So it's easy enough with your grandmother, but if you're looking at other materials, sometimes it's easy to forget to put it into perspective what you're reading. So be sure to keep these points in mind as you move forward throughout the semester. For the next video, you're going to be watching a discussion of peer review and strategies for giving good responses within the peer review process. This week you also read an article by Richard Straub called Responding, Really Responding to Other Students' Writing. And within that piece, the author actually took the role of the responder and spelled out the process that you go through when you're actually responding to a paper. And he kind of gives you a bit of a checklist as you move through that. So the next video, video 2, is designed as a follow-up to that reading.